The autumn sun cast long shadows across Gila Bend, Arizona, as Julia Keller watched her father's hands tremble while counting the meager pile of coins on their kitchen table. At 22, she never imagined her fate would be decided by a stack of metal that wouldn't even reach the height of her thumb. "It's not enough, Papa," she whispered, her throat tight with unshed tears. Harold Keller, once a proud rancher whose land stretched for acres beyond their modest homestead, now looked every bit of his 50 years and more. The drought of 1885 had ravaged their cattle, and the bank loans that followed had slowly strangled what remained of their livelihood. "Mr. Hargrove has made an offer," her father said, not meeting her eyes. "He'll forgive all our debts if—" Julia's heart sank. She knew what was coming before her father could finish his sentence. Theodore Hargrove, the wealthiest man in the territory and 30 years her senior, had been watching her with hungry eyes since she was 16. Now, with her family teetering on the edge of destitution, he'd found his opportunity. "If I marry him," she finished for her father, her voice hollow. Her mother sobbed quietly from the corner of the room, while her younger sisters stared at their laps, too young to fully understand but old enough to sense the gravity of the situation. "It's just marriage, Julia," her father pleaded, finally meeting her gaze with desperation in his eyes. "And Hargrove has promised to take care of you. You'll have a fine house in town, new dresses, servants, and a husband who's bought me like cattle," Julia cut in, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. She understood her father's desperation, but the thought of Theodore Hargrove's hands on her made her skin crawl. "We've got until the end of the month to decide," her father said, slumping in his chair, "before the bank takes everything." That night, Julia couldn't sleep. The walls of the small bedroom she shared with her sisters seemed to close in around her. Through the thin window, the vast Arizona desert beckoned with a cruel freedom she couldn't grasp. By sunrise, she had made up her mind. She would sacrifice herself for her family. 2 days later, Julia rode into town on their last decent horse, a list of supplies clutched in her hand. Her errand was a simple one: flour, coffee, and whatever else they could afford, but it gave her a few precious hours away from the weight of her family's expectations. Gila Bend had grown considerably in the 5 years since the railroad came through. What had once been little more than a stagecoach stop was now a bustling town with a proper main street, complete with a hotel, several saloons, and Hargrove's Mercantile, the largest store for 50 miles in any direction. Julia tied her horse outside the general store, careful to avoid Hargrove's establishment. The last thing she wanted was to encounter her would-be husband before necessary. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, a commotion down the street caught her attention. A group of men had gathered outside the sheriff's office, their voices raised. Among them stood a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, with a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. Even from a distance, Julia could tell he wasn't from around Gila Bend. His clothes, though dusty from the trail, were of good quality, and the way he carried himself spoke of confidence rather than arrogance. Curiosity piqued. Julia moved closer, pretending to examine the goods displayed in the window of the milliner's shop. "I'm telling you, Sheriff, those cattle were stolen," the stranger was saying, his deep voice carrying across the street. "And the brands were altered. I tracked them from my ranch near Tucson all the way here." Sheriff Wilson, a man more interested in maintaining peace with the wealthy than upholding the law, shook his head. "I can't just accuse Theodore Hargrove of cattle rustling without proof, Mr. Owens." Julia's breath caught. Hargrove was involved in cattle rustling. It seemed impossible that the most respected businessman in town could be a thief, yet something about the stranger's confident stance suggested he wasn't making idle accusations. I have the proof, the man Mr. Owens insisted, pulling papers from his vest pocket. These are the original brands, and I have witnesses who can identify the cattle. Cole Owens, is it? Hargrove's voice cut through the tension as he approached the group, flanked by two of his men. I've heard of your ranch. Impressive operation for a man so young. But these accusations are serious, and I don't take kindly to having my reputation questioned. Julia shrank back against the building, not wanting to be seen. Cole Owens stood his ground, unflinching as Hargrove moved closer. I'm not questioning anything, Hargrove. I'm stating facts. Those cattle in your north pasture belong to me, and I want them back. Hargrove's laugh was cold. Sheriff, escort Mr. Owens out of town. If he returns with these ridiculous claims, arrest him for slander. The sheriff hesitated, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge Hargrove. Mr. Owens, I think it's best if you leave for now. Come back with more substantial evidence. Julia watched as Cole Owens looked from the sheriff to Hargrove, his jaw clenched in frustration. Then, unexpectedly, his gaze shifted and met hers. For a moment, neither looked away. There was something in his eyes, intelligence, determination, and a warmth that made Julia's cheeks flush. This isn't over, Cole finally said to Hargrove, breaking the connection with Julia. He tipped his hat to the sheriff and mounted his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood out among the town's more modest steeds. As he rode past where Julia stood, he slowed slightly. "Madam," he said quietly, tipping his hat to her as well before continuing down the street. Julia watched him go, an inexplicable sense of loss washing over her. Shaking herself, she hurried into the general store, her mind racing with thoughts of cattle rustling, Theodore Hargrove, and a pair of intense eyes that had seemed to see right through her. Inside the store, Mrs. Peterson greeted her warmly. "Julia, dear, I haven't seen you in town for ages. How's your family holding up?" Julia managed a smile. "We're managing, Mrs. Peterson, just need the usual supplies." She handed over her short list, acutely aware that it was less than half of what they used to purchase regularly. While Mrs. Peterson gathered her items, Julia glanced out the window. Hargrove and his men were still in the street, talking in low, urgent tones. Whatever Cole Owens had accused him of had clearly rattled the usually composed businessman. "That'll be $1.65, Mrs. Peterson said, pulling Julia from her thoughts. Julia counted out the coins carefully. It was nearly all they had left. "I heard about Mr. Hargrove's offer," Mrs. Peterson said softly, her kind eyes full of sympathy. "Your father mentioned it when he was in last week." Heat rushed to Julia's face. Was everyone in town already talking about her impending marriage? "Nothing's been decided yet," she said stiffly. Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. "You're a smart girl, Julia. Just be careful. Mr. Hargrove isn't always what he seems." Before Julia could ask what she meant, the store door swung open and Theodore Hargrove himself stepped inside. Julia froze, her packages half gathered in her arms. "Miss Keller," he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "What a pleasant surprise. I was just on my way to call on your father." Julia nodded politely, trying to hide her discomfort. At 48, Hargrove was still a handsome man, with salt and pepper hair and expensive clothes that set him apart from most men in Gila Bend. But there was a coldness in his eyes that no amount of practiced charm could disguise. "Mr. Hargrove," she acknowledged, gathering her purchases more quickly. "Allow me to escort you home," he offered, reaching for her packages. "That's kind of you, but I'm capable of managing on my own," Julia replied, clutching her items closer. Hargrove's smile tightened. "I insist. It would give us a chance to become better acquainted before our arrangement is finalized." Julia's stomach twisted at his words. She opened her mouth to protest again when the store door opened once more, and Cole Owens stepped inside. The tension in the small space became palpable as the two men locked eyes. "Hargrove," Cole said coolly. "Fancy meeting you here." "I thought I made it clear you weren't welcome in Gila Bend, Owens," Hargrove replied, his hand drifting toward his gun. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat nervously. "Gentlemen, please. This is a respectable establishment." Cole ignored Hargrove and tipped his hat to the storekeeper. "Madam, I just need some supplies for the trail. Won't be but a minute." As he moved further into the store, he nodded to Julia. "Miss Keller," she supplied, grateful for the interruption. "Julia Keller." "Miss Keller," he repeated, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Hargrove stepped between them, his back to Julia as he faced Cole. "Stay away from Miss Keller. She's spoken for." Julia bristled at being discussed as if she weren't present. "Mr. Hargrove, I merely greeted the lady," Cole said, his voice level but his eyes challenging. "Last I checked, that wasn't against the law in Arizona territory." "Just get your supplies and go," Hargrove snapped. Cole's gaze shifted to Julia again, and she was struck by the quiet strength in his expression. Without another word, he turned to Mrs. Peterson and began listing the items he needed. Hargrove took Julia's elbow in a grip that was just shy of painful. "Come along, Miss Keller. Your father will be expecting you." Unable to cause more of a scene, Julia allowed herself to be guided out of the store, glancing back only once to find Cole Owens watching her with an unreadable expression. Outside, Hargrove helped her onto her horse with a proprietary air that made her skin crawl. "I'll be calling on your father this evening to discuss the details of our arrangement," he said, his voice low so that passers-by wouldn't hear. "I expect a favorable answer considering the precarious state of your family's finances." Julia's hands tightened on the reins. "My father hasn't made his decision yet." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I think he has. He just doesn't know it yet." He stepped back, replacing his hat. "Until tonight, Miss Keller." Julia urged her horse forward, desperate to put distance between herself and Theodore Hargrove. As she rode past the saloon, she caught sight of Cole Owens emerging from the general store, his own supplies in hand. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded in acknowledgement before turning toward the livery stable. For reasons she couldn't explain, Julia found herself hoping their paths would cross again. When Julia arrived home, she found her father in the barn, attempting to repair a broken wagon wheel with tools that had seen better days. His thinning hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his hands were cracked and bleeding from the hard work. "Papa, let me help," she said, setting down her packages and reaching for the bandages they kept for such occasions. Harold Keller shook his head. "I've got it, Julia. Did you get everything we needed?" "Yes," she said, kneeling beside him anyway and taking his hand to clean the cuts. "Papa, I saw Mr. Hargrove in town. He said he's coming here tonight," her father stilled. "Did he? Well, I suppose we'll have to hear what he has to say." "You know what he wants," Julia said quietly, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around his palm. "And you know what my answer is." "Julia, I'll do it," she interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. "For the family. For the farm." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted this for you, Julia. Your mother and I always hoped you'd marry for love like we did." Julia swallowed the lump in her throat. "Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love." Her father pulled her into a fierce hug. "You're too good for him, my girl. Too good for any of us." That evening, the Keller family dressed in their Sunday best to receive Theodore Hargrove. Julia's mother had prepared a simple but dignified meal, stretching their meager supplies as far as they would go. Julia's younger sisters, Emma and Sarah, aged 16 and 14, had been instructed to be on their best behavior. Julia wore her one good dress, a pale blue cotton that her mother had remade 3 times to keep up with changing fashions. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was pinned up in a modest style that nevertheless framed her face becomingly. When Hargrove arrived, he brought gifts: candy for the girls, a bottle of expensive whiskey for her father, and a small package for Julia that he insisted she open immediately. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant. It was beautiful and clearly expensive, but as Hargrove fastened it around her neck, Julia felt as if she were being collared like an animal. "It suits you," he murmured, his fingers lingering on her skin a moment too long. Dinner was a tense affair, with Hargrove dominating the conversation with tales of his business successes and plans for expansion. Only once did Julia find the courage to speak up. "I heard an interesting accusation in town today," she said during a lull. "A rancher from Tucson claimed some of his cattle had been stolen and ended up in your herds, Mr. Hargrove." The table fell silent. Her father looked alarmed, her mother confused, and Hargrove's expression hardened for just an instant before his practiced smile returned. "Ah, you must have overheard that troublemaker, Cole Owens. The man's desperate and looking to cause problems for more successful ranchers. Pay it no mind." "He seemed very certain," Julia pressed, ignoring her father's warning look. Hargrove set down his fork. "Miss Keller, such matters are hardly appropriate dinner conversation, especially in the presence of young ladies." He nodded toward her sisters. "Besides, the sheriff has already dismissed his claims." Julia wanted to argue further but knew it would only create problems for her family. Instead, she nodded and returned to her meal, but her mind was racing. What if Cole Owens was telling the truth? What kind of man was Theodore Hargrove really? After dinner, while her mother and sisters cleared the table, Hargrove asked to speak with Julia and her father privately. In the small parlor, he wasted no time getting to the point. "I believe we understand each other, Mr. Keller. I am prepared to forgive all debts your family owes to me and my bank, and to provide a generous allowance for your wife and daughters in exchange for Julia's hand in marriage." Harold Keller looked pained but nodded. "Those are generous terms, Mr. Hargrove. Additionally," Hargrove continued, "I will allow your family to remain on this land as tenants, provided you manage it according to my requirements." Julia's head snapped up. "Tenants, but this is our land." Hargrove's smile was thin. "My dear, this land will belong to the bank by the end of the month unless your father can produce $300. We both know that's impossible without my intervention." Julia looked to her father, hoping he would object, but he only stared at his hands. "I would like to set the wedding date for 2 weeks from Saturday," Hargrove said, his tone making it clear this was not up for negotiation. "A small ceremony, of course, given the circumstances." 2 weeks, Julia gasped. "That's hardly enough time to what, Miss Keller, to prepare?" "There's little preparation needed for a simple ceremony, or perhaps you were hoping for time to find another solution." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I assure you there is none." Harold Keller finally spoke. "Mr. Hargrove, while we appreciate your offer, might I suggest a slightly longer engagement? Perhaps a month or two to give Julia time to adjust to the idea and to make proper preparations." Hargrove considered this for a moment. "Very well. 1 month, but not a day more. And I expect regular visits with my fiancé during that time." Julia felt sick at the thought but forced herself to nod. 1 month would at least give her time to what? Accept her fate, look for an escape that didn't exist. After Hargrove left, promising to return in 2 days to begin courting her properly, Julia fled to the barn, needing solitude to collect her thoughts. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. She leaned against the weathered boards of the barn and let her tears fall freely for the first time. "Miss Keller," Julia spun around, hastily wiping her eyes. Cole Owens stood a few yards away, his hat in his hands, looking uncertain. "Mr. Owens, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to compose herself. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, keeping his distance respectfully. "I followed Hargrove out here. I needed to know what he was up to. You were spying." Despite everything, Julia found herself smiling slightly at his audacity. Cole shrugged, a hint of boyish charm breaking through his serious demeanor. "Gathering intelligence, I'd call it. Miss Keller, I couldn't help overhearing part of your conversation with Hargrove. Is he really forcing you to marry him to settle your family's debts?" Julia's smile faded. "That's a private matter, Mr. Owens. Call me Cole," he said, taking a step closer. "And I know it's not my business, but that's not right. Hargrove is using your family's misfortune to get what he wants. It's the same way he operates in business. You really believe he stole your cattle?" Julia asked, curious despite herself. "I know he did. And not just mine. He's been doing it for years, buying off the sheriff, threatening anyone who speaks against him, slowly taking over every ranch and farm in the county." Julia considered this. It aligned with the rumors she'd heard whispered in town, rumors most people were too afraid to voice openly. "Even if what you say is true, what can I do? My family will lose everything if I don't agree to this marriage." Cole's expression softened. "That's not your burden to bear, Miss Keller. No one should have to sell themselves to pay off debts." His words struck her deeply. Not her burden to bear. For weeks, she'd felt the weight of her family's survival pressing down on her shoulders, crushing her dreams and hopes. To hear someone say aloud what her heart had been screaming in silence was both a relief and a pain. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's no other way." Cole stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "There's always another way. You just haven't found it yet." For a long moment they stood in silence, the moonlight casting soft shadows around them. Julia was acutely aware of his presence, solid, reassuring, unlike anything she'd felt before. "I should go," she finally said, reluctantly breaking the spell. "My family will be wondering where I am." Cole nodded, stepping back. "Of course. But Miss Keller, Julia, may I call on you tomorrow? There are things I need to discuss with your father, things that might help your situation." Julia hesitated. Associating with Cole would anger Hargrove, potentially making things worse for her family, and yet, yes, she decided. "Come tomorrow afternoon, my father will be here." Cole smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Until tomorrow, then." As he disappeared into the darkness, Julia found herself touching the diamond pendant at her throat, Hargrove's claim on her. With a sudden movement, she unclasped it and slipped it into her pocket. She wasn't his yet, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope that she might never be true to his word. Cole arrived the following afternoon. Julia had spent the morning helping her mother with chores, all the while wondering what Cole might have to say that could possibly change their situation. She had told her father about the expected visitor, carefully explaining that Cole Owens had information about Hargrove that might be important. Harold Keller had been skeptical, but agreed to hear the man out. When Cole rode up on his chestnut stallion, Julia couldn't help but notice how different he looked from Theodore Hargrove. Where Hargrove was all polished refinement and calculated charm, Cole had a natural ease about him, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. He dismounted with fluid grace and approached the house, removing his hat as Julia and her father met him on the porch. "Mr. Keller, Miss Keller," he greeted them, his gaze lingering on Julia for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Harold Keller's handshake was cautious. "My daughter says you have information about Theodore Hargrove that I should hear." "I warn you, Mr. Owens, Hargrove has been well, not a friend, but a business associate for many years." Cole nodded. "I understand, sir, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't important. May we speak privately?" They settled in the parlor, the same room where Hargrove had laid out his proposal the night before. Julia served coffee, insisting on staying for the conversation despite her father's suggestion that she leave the men to talk. "Mr. Keller," Cole began once they were seated, "I believe Theodore Hargrove is not only a cattle rustler but has been systematically forcing ranchers and farmers out of business throughout the territory." Harold frowned. "Those are serious accusations, young man." "Yes, sir, they are. And I have proof." Cole reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather portfolio. "These are records of brand alterations, witnesses' statements, and a map showing how properties acquired by Hargrove over the past 5 years form a strategic path from Tucson to the California border." Julia leaned forward to see the documents as her father spread them on the small table. Even to her untrained eye, the evidence was compelling. Brand registrations showed subtle alterations that could transform one mark into another with a hot iron and a steady hand. The map revealed a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. "This is why he's so determined to acquire our land," Julia said softly. "Look, Papa, our property connects his holdings to the north with those to the south." Harold studied the papers, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. "Even if this is all true, what can be done? Sheriff Wilson is in Hargrove's pocket, as is Judge Parker." "Not all lawmen are corrupt," Cole said. "I've been working with a U.S. Marshal who's building a case against Hargrove. We need more witnesses, more people willing to stand up to him." "And risk everything." Harold shook his head. "I can't." "My family is being torn apart already," Julia interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Papa, he wants to marry me in a month. He'll own our land anyway. At least this way we have a chance to fight back." Cole looked at her with new respect. "Your daughter is right, Mr. Keller, and you wouldn't be fighting alone. There are others who have been harmed by Hargrove, others who are ready to testify if they know they're not standing alone." Harold ran a hand through his thinning hair. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Owens?" "The marshal is gathering evidence and witnesses. He'll be in Tucson next week. If you're willing to give a statement about Hargrove's tactics, how he's leveraged your debts, threatened foreclosure, forced this marriage, it could help build the case against him." Julia's heart raced at the possibility. "And if Hargrove is arrested, what happens to our debts?" Cole hesitated. "I can't promise they disappear, but if Hargrove's found guilty of fraud and extortion, the court might invalidate or reduce what you owe, and I might be able to help with the rest." Harold's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "My ranch is doing well, Mr. Keller. I could offer you a loan, a legitimate one, with fair terms to cover what you legitimately owe, or, if you prefer, a partnership. Your experience would be valuable to my operation." Julia watched her father closely, seeing hope battle with pride in his weathered face. "Why would you do this for strangers, Mr. Owens?" he finally asked. Cole's gaze shifted to Julia for a brief moment. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because Hargrove has hurt too many people already. It needs to stop." After a long silence, Harold nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. That's all I can promise for now." "That's all I ask, sir," Cole said, rising to his feet. "May I call again tomorrow? The marshal needs an answer soon." "Yes, you may," Harold said, extending his hand with more warmth than before. "And thank you for bringing this to me." As Julia walked Cole to his horse, a cautious hope blossomed within her. They paused at the edge of the yard, out of earshot of the house. "You really think this could work?" she asked, searching his face for reassurance. "I believe it can," Cole said, his voice low and earnest. "But Julia, you should know Hargrove is dangerous when cornered, if he suspects you're working against him." "I'm not afraid," she said, lifting her chin. Cole smiled, his eyes warming. "No, I don't think you are, but be careful anyway, for my peace of mind if nothing else." The personal note in his voice made her pulse quicken. "Why do you care what happens to me, Cole Owens? You barely know me." He hesitated, then reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When she didn't, he gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingertips brushing her cheek. "I'm not sure," he admitted softly, "but I do. More than makes sense." For a breathless moment, Julia thought he might kiss her. Part of her wanted him to, even as another part recognized the impropriety of such a gesture when she was technically promised to another man. Instead, Cole stepped back, replacing his hat. "I'll return tomorrow, Miss Keller. Please give my regards to your mother and sisters." As he rode away, Julia touched her cheek where his fingers had been, a smile forming unbidden on her lips. For the first time in months, the future didn't seem quite so bleak. That night, over a simple dinner of bean stew and cornbread, Harold Keller shared Cole's information with his wife and daughters. Mary Keller listened in silence, her work-worn hands clasped tightly in her lap. "So this young man is offering to help us stand against Hargrove," she said when her husband finished. "Do you trust him, Harold?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. "His evidence is compelling and he seems sincere, but going against Hargrove is risky." "More risky than selling our daughter to that man." Mary's voice was unusually sharp. Julia looked at her mother in surprise. Mary Keller was typically soft-spoken, deferring to her husband in most matters. Harold sighed heavily. "You know I don't want that, Mary, but what choice do we have?" "Maybe Mr. Owens is offering us a choice," Emma, the middle daughter, piped up. At 16, she was beginning to understand the complexities of their situation. "I like him," added 14-year-old Sarah. "He has kind eyes." Julia smiled at her youngest sister's assessment, remembering the warmth in Cole's gaze when he'd looked at her. "He does, doesn't he?" Mary studied her eldest daughter carefully. "Julia, what do you think of this man?" Julia considered her answer, aware of her family watching her. "I think he's honest, and brave to stand up to Hargrove when no one else will." "And handsome," Emma teased, earning a blush from Julia. "That's hardly relevant," Julia protested, though she couldn't deny the truth of it. Harold cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, we need to decide whether to trust him with our future. If we give statements to this marshal and Hargrove finds out before he's arrested, he'll take everything immediately," Mary finished for him. "But Harold, he's going to take everything anyway. At least this way we keep our dignity, and Julia keeps her freedom." Julia reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gratefully. Harold looked around the table at the women in his family, his expression softening. "When did you all become so brave?" "All right. When Mr. Owens returns tomorrow, I'll tell him we're in." The next morning dawned bright and clear, but Julia woke to the sound of horses approaching. Peering through the curtains, her heart sank at the sight of Theodore Hargrove and two of his men riding up to the house. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs, reaching the front door just as her father opened it to greet their unwelcome visitor. "Hargrove," Harold said stiffly, "we weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," Hargrove replied, eyeing Harold's work clothes with disdain. "But I find unexpected visits often reveal the most interesting information." His gaze shifted to Julia. "Good morning, my dear. You look lovely as always." Julia forced a smile. "Mr. Hargrove." "I wonder if I might have a word with you, Harold," Hargrove continued, his tone pleasant but his eyes cold. "In private." Harold hesitated, then nodded. "Julia, please ask your mother to bring coffee to the parlor." As the men disappeared into the house, Julia hurried to the kitchen, her mind racing. Had Hargrove somehow learned about Cole's visit, about their plans to speak with the marshal? When she returned with the coffee tray, she could hear raised voices from the parlor. Setting down the tray outside the door, she moved closer, straining to hear. "Absolutely unacceptable," Hargrove was saying, his voice tight with anger. "I made my terms clear, Keller. Your daughter's hand in marriage for the forgiveness of your debts. And now I learn you've been entertaining other offers." "I don't know what you're talking about," her father replied, but Julia could hear the tremor in his voice. "Don't play the fool with me. Cole Owens was here yesterday. My men saw his horse tied outside your barn for over an hour." Julia's stomach dropped. They'd been watched. "Mr. Owens is an acquaintance, nothing more," Harold said carefully. "An acquaintance who's been making wild accusations about me all over the territory." Hargrove's voice rose. "Do you take me for an idiot, Keller? I know exactly what he's trying to do, and I won't stand for it." There was a long silence, and when Hargrove spoke again, his voice had returned to its usual smooth cadence. "Let me be perfectly clear. If I see Cole Owens anywhere near your property or your daughter again, our arrangement is null and void. The bank will foreclose immediately, and I'll personally ensure that no one in this territory will hire you or offer you shelter." "You can't do that," Harold protested weakly. "Can't I? Who do you think owns the bank, the largest businesses in town, and has the ear of every influential man from here to Tucson? Now, I'm willing to overlook this indiscretion, provided it doesn't happen again, and provided Julia is a bit more enthusiastic about our engagement." Julia had heard enough. Squaring her shoulders, she picked up the coffee tray and entered the parlor. "Your coffee, Mr. Hargrove," she said, setting the tray down with deliberate care. "I apologize for the delay." Hargrove's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all, my dear. Your father and I were just discussing our arrangement." "Yes, I heard," Julia said, meeting his gaze steadily. "You were threatening my family." Harold's face paled. "Julia, no, Papa, I won't stand silently by while he bullies us." She turned back to Hargrove. "You may own half the territory, Mr. Hargrove, but you don't own me. Not yet." Hargrove's expression hardened for an instant before smoothing into a practiced smile. "Spirited, aren't you? I admire that within reason, but make no mistake, Julia. In less than a month, you will be my wife, and this spirit of yours will need to be properly channeled." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Julia suppressed a shudder. "Now then," Hargrove continued, turning back to Harold, "I expect you to honor our agreement. No more visits from Owens, and I want Julia to accompany me to church on Sunday, where we will formally announce our engagement." Harold nodded reluctantly. "As you wish." "Excellent." Hargrove rose, adjusting his expensive jacket. "I'll send a carriage for you on Sunday morning, my dear. Wear something appropriate for your new station in life." After he left, Julia and her father sat in stunned silence until Mary joined them, her face drawn with worry. "He knows about Cole," Julia said simply. Harold nodded. "And he's made it clear what will happen if we continue to associate with him." "I'm sorry, Julia. I think we have to go through with the marriage." "No," Julia said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "There has to be another way. Cole said the marshal would be in Tucson next week." "If I could somehow get there, absolutely not," her father interrupted. "It's too dangerous. Hargrove has men watching us now, and Tucson is 3 days' ride away." "Your father's right," Mary said, though her eyes were sad. "We can't risk it, Julia." Julia wanted to argue further, but the defeat in her parents' faces stopped her. They had been beaten down by years of struggle, and now by Hargrove's threats. But she wasn't beaten yet. Later that afternoon, Julia slipped away to the barn, ostensibly to gather eggs but actually to think. If Cole returned as promised, Hargrove's men would see him, and all would be lost. Somehow, she needed to warn him away. As she collected eggs from the nesting boxes, a shadow fell across the barn door. Julia spun around, relaxing slightly when she saw it was only Emma. "Julia, there's someone here to see you," her sister said, her voice hushed with excitement. He came through the back way, past the old creek bed. Julia's heart leapt. "Cole," Emma nodded, her eyes bright. "He says he can't stay long. He's waiting by the willow tree." The willow tree stood at the far edge of their property, hidden from the main road by a small rise. It was where Julia often went when she needed solitude. "Cover for me," Julia told her sister, handing over the egg basket. "If anyone asks, I've gone to check on the calf in the south pasture." Emma nodded solemnly. "Be careful, Julia." Julia made her way to the willow tree by a circuitous route, keeping to the shadows of the outbuildings and then to the low ground along the creek bed. When she reached the willow, Cole was waiting, his horse tethered nearby. "Cole," she said, relief washing over her, "you shouldn't be here. Hargrove knows you visited yesterday. He has men watching the house." Cole's expression darkened. "I thought as much. I spotted them on my way, and that's why I came around the back way." He took her hands in his touch sending warmth through her despite her anxiety. "Are you all right? Did he threaten you?" "Not me directly," Julia said, "but he threatened my family. He's moving up our engagement. We're to announce it publicly on Sunday." She couldn't keep the despair from her voice. Cole's grip on her hands tightened. "Then we need to move faster. The marshal is coming to Tucson earlier than planned. He'll be there the day after tomorrow. My father won't go against Hargrove now, not after his threats." "Then you'll have to come without him," Cole said, his eyes intense. "Julia, I know we've only just met, but I'm asking you to trust me. Come with me to Tucson. Give your statement to the marshal. With your testimony about being forced into marriage to cover debts, along with the evidence of cattle rustling, we can bring Hargrove down." Julia's mind raced. What Cole was proposing was reckless, potentially scandalous, an unmarried woman traveling alone with a man she barely knew. And yet the alternative was a lifetime shackled to Theodore Hargrove. "When would we leave?" she asked, her decision already made. "Tonight, after dark. Pack only what you can carry on horseback." Cole hesitated. "You should leave a note for your family." "I don't want them thinking you've been kidnapped." Julia nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "I'll meet you here at midnight." Cole cupped her cheek gently, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure about this, Julia? Once we leave, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I won't be sold to pay my family's debts, Cole. I can't." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's my girl." He caught himself, looking slightly embarrassed. "I mean, I know what you mean," Julia said, smiling despite everything. For a moment they stood close, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Cole stepped back reluctantly. "Midnight. Bring warm clothes. The desert gets cold at night." As he mounted his horse and disappeared among the trees, Julia felt a curious lightness in her heart. She was taking her fate into her own hands, and though the path ahead was uncertain, it felt more right than anything had in a long time. That evening, Julia moved through her chores as if in a dream, aware of each mundane task in a new way, knowing it might be the last time she performed it in this house. She was careful to behave normally, though her mind was busy planning what to pack, what to write in her note, how to slip away unnoticed. After dinner, When her family gathered in the parlor as usual, Julia felt a pang of guilt. Her disappearance would cause them worry, perhaps even danger if Hargrove blamed them for her escape. "Julia, you're quiet tonight," her mother observed, glancing up from her mending. "Just tired, Mama," Julia replied, forcing a smile, "and thinking about Sunday." Mary's eyes softened with sympathy. "Oh, my dear girl, I know, Mama," Julia interrupted gently. "It's all right." Later, in the bedroom she shared with her sisters, Julia waited until their breathing deepened with sleep before silently rising from her bed. She dressed quickly in her sturdiest clothes, a simple blouse, wool skirt, and sturdy boots. Over these, she added a warm shawl and her mother's old riding jacket, which had been passed down to her when she turned 18. From beneath her mattress, she withdrew a small cloth bag containing her few valuables, a locket with a lock of her grandmother's hair, a silver thimble that had been a gift from her father, and a carefully folded handkerchief embroidered with lilies that her sisters had made for her last birthday. To these, she added Hargrove's diamond pendant, which she would sell if necessary to help her family. She would not, keep anything from that man. Finally, she penned 2 notes by the light of a small candle. One for her family, explaining that she could not marry Hargrove and was seeking help to fight his claims. The other for Hargrove himself, should he come looking for her, stating clearly that she went of her own free will and that her family had no knowledge of her plans. With a last look at her sleeping sisters, Julia slipped from the room and down the stairs, avoiding the 3rd step that always creaked. She placed the notes on the kitchen table, where they would be found in the morning, then quietly let herself out the back door. The night was clear and cold, the stars blazing overhead as she made her way to the willow tree, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. Every sound made her jump: the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant howl of a coyote. When she reached the willow, Cole was already waiting, 2 horses ready for travel. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Julia asked, securing her small bundle to the saddle of the horse he'd brought for her, a sturdy bay mare with a gentle eye. "I hoped you would," Cole admitted, "but I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd changed your mind. It's a big risk you're taking, Julia." "No bigger than the one you're taking by helping me," she pointed out, mounting the mare with practiced ease. Growing up on a ranch had at least given her that skill. Cole swung up onto his own horse, the chestnut stallion she'd admired before. "We'll head south first, then cut east toward Tucson once we're clear of Hargrove's men. It's a longer route but safer." As they rode away from the only home Julia had ever known, a mix of emotions swirled within her: fear, excitement, sadness, and a growing sense of freedom. She glanced back once at the dark silhouette of the farmhouse against the starlit sky, silently promising her family that she would find a way to help them. Then she turned forward, toward an uncertain future but one of her own choosing, with Cole Owens riding steadily by her side. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and drink from Cole's canteen. Julia was grateful for the moon, nearly full, which illuminated their path across the open desert. Despite the gravity of their situation, she found herself marveling at the beauty of the landscape: the silver-washed saguaros standing like sentinels, the distant mountains etched against the star-filled sky. "How are you holding up?" Cole asked during one of their brief stops, his voice low and concerned. "I'm fine," Julia assured him, though her body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. "How much farther until we're safely away from Gila Bend?" "Another few hours should put us beyond Hargrove's immediate reach," Cole replied, scanning the horizon. "We'll find shelter during the hottest part of the day tomorrow, then continue to Tucson tomorrow night." Julia nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of unease at the thought of spending the day alone with Cole in some hidden shelter. It wasn't proper, of course, but nothing about this situation was proper. And despite having known him for only days, she trusted Cole Owens more than she'd trusted anyone outside her family. They continued riding as the moon began its descent, the desert gradually transforming around them. The flat, open terrain gave way to more varied topography, rocky outcroppings, dry washes, and scattered stands of mesquite and palo verde trees. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, Cole led them into a narrow canyon, following what appeared to be a game trail. The walls rose on either side, providing welcome shade as the sun climbed higher. "There's a place up ahead," Cole explained, his voice echoing slightly against the rock walls. "An old line shack I've used before. It's not much, but it's hidden and has water nearby." The shack turned out to be little more than a one-room structure of rough-hewn logs and a sod roof, nestled against the canyon wall and nearly invisible until they were upon it. But to Julia's tired eyes, it looked like a palace. Cole helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Wait here while I check inside," he said, drawing his pistol. Julia watched as he cautiously approached the shack, pushing open the weathered door with the barrel of his gun. After a moment, he holstered his weapon and motioned for her to join him. "All clear," he said with a smile. "Just a few mice who have made themselves at home." The interior was sparse but clean enough: a simple wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, and a small fireplace. Dusty shelves held a few supplies, canned goods, matches, a lantern with a small amount of oil. "It's perfect," Julia said sincerely, sinking gratefully onto one of the chairs. Cole busied himself caring for the horses, unsaddling them and leading them to a small spring that bubbled up from the rocks a short distance away. When he returned, he brought fresh water and set about starting a small fire in the fireplace. "We should be safe here," he said, feeding twigs to the growing flames. "This canyon isn't on any maps and few people know it exists." Julia watched him work, struck by the efficiency of his movements, the quiet confidence he exuded. In the growing light of day, she could study him more closely than before: the strong line of his jaw, now showing a day's growth of beard, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his nape, the capable hands that could be both gentle and strong. "You're staring, Miss Keller," Cole said without looking up, though she could hear the smile in his voice. Julia blushed. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it is that 3 days ago I didn't know you existed. And now I've run away with you, putting my trust and safety in your hands." Cole looked up then, his eyes serious. "I won't let you down, Julia. I promise you that." "I believe you," she said simply, and was surprised to realize how completely she meant it. They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Cole's saddlebags, supplemented with a can of peaches found on the shack's shelves. As they ate, Cole told Julia more about his ranch near Tucson, about his plans to expand his herd, about the home he was building. "It's nothing fancy yet," he admitted. "Just 4 rooms and a porch, but there's good land, plenty of water, and room to grow." "It sounds wonderful," Julia said, imagining the life he described so different from the stifling existence she would have had with Hargrove. "What about you?" Cole asked. "If you weren't being forced into marriage, what would you want for your life?" Julia considered the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "I've never thought beyond the ranch," she admitted. "I love the land, the animals. I thought someday I might marry a neighboring rancher, have children, stay close to my family." She paused, suddenly wistful. "I suppose I wanted what my parents had: a partnership built on love and respect, working together to build something that would last. Cole's expression softened. That doesn't sound like too much to ask. In this world, for a woman, sometimes I think it is. Julia sighed, then straightened her shoulders. But I refuse to settle for less. Good, Cole said firmly. You deserve nothing less. As the day wore on, exhaustion began to overtake them both. Cole insisted Julia take the cot while he made do with a bedroll on the floor. I won't be able to sleep anyway, he assured her when she protested. I need to keep watch. Wake me in a few hours, Julia said through a yawn. You need rest too. But when she awoke, the light filtering through the single small window told her it was late afternoon. Cole sat at the table, cleaning his revolver, looking tired but alert. You should have woken me, Julia chided, rising and smoothing her skirts. Cole shrugged. You needed the rest more than I did. That's debatable, she replied, noting the shadows under his eyes. But thank you. As the heat of the day began to wane, they prepared to continue their journey. Cole studied a well-worn map, tracing their route with his finger. We'll reach Tucson by midday tomorrow if we keep a good pace, he said. The marshal will be staying at the Grand Hotel. Once we've given our statements, you'll be under his protection while I gather more witnesses. Julia nodded, trying to ignore the pang she felt at the thought of separating from Cole. And then what? Cole looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Then, if all goes well, Hargrove will be arrested and you'll be free to return home to your family. Or. Julia prompted when he didn't continue. Cole hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. He rose and moved to stand before her, taking her hands in his. Julia, I know this is sudden. We've known each other only days, but sometimes a man just knows when something is right. His grip on her hands tightened slightly. When Hargrove is behind bars and your family is safe, I'd like you to consider staying in Tucson. With me. Julia's breath caught. Cole, not as anything improper, he hastened to add. I have a married sister in town. You could stay with her while we court properly, if you were willing. The hope in his eyes made Julia's heart ache with a sweet pain. You want to court me? More than anything, Cole admitted, a flush rising to his tan cheeks. I knew it from the moment I saw you in town, standing so brave and beautiful outside the milliner's shop. But I'll understand if you don't feel the same, or if you need time to. Julia silenced him by squeezing his hands. Yes, she said simply. When this is over, I would very much like for you to court me, Cole Owens. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun after a storm, transforming his serious features with joy. For a moment, Julia hoped he might kiss her. Instead, he raised her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. You've made me the happiest man in the Arizona territory, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching. Cole's expression changed instantly, all warmth replaced by alert wariness. Get your things, he said quietly, moving to the window. Quickly. Julia grabbed her small bundle while Cole checked his gun and peered cautiously outside. How many? She whispered, fear clutching at her throat. 3 riders coming up the canyon, Cole replied grimly. And from their direction, they're not just passing through. Hargrove's men, Cole nodded, his jaw tight. Most likely, they must have picked up our trail somehow. Julia's mind raced. What do we do? Cole considered their options, his expression grim. There's no time to outrun them. The canyon narrows ahead. If we try to flee that way, they'll catch us in the open. He glanced around the small shack. We'll have to make a stand here. Fear threatened to overwhelm Julia, but she forced it down. Tell me what to do. Cole's eyes softened for a moment. You're a remarkable woman, Julia Keller. Then his expression hardened again as he handed her a small derringer from his boot. Take this. Hide behind the cot and don't come out unless I tell you to. Julia took the gun, her hand surprisingly steady. She'd fired her father's rifle before, but never a pistol. Still, she understood the basic principle: aim and pull the trigger. Cole positioned himself beside the window, his own revolver ready. The approaching riders were close enough now that Julia could hear the jingle of tack and the murmur of voices. "They're stopping," Cole whispered. "Get down." Julia crouched behind the cot, the derringer clutched in her sweating palm as the door to the shack was flung open with a crash. "Well, well," drawled a familiar voice that made Julia's blood run cold. "What have we here?" Theodore Hargrove stood in the doorway, flanked by two armed men. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled from hard riding, but his cold eyes were triumphant as they took in the scene. "Hargrove," Cole acknowledged, his gun pointed steadily at the intruders. "You're trespassing." Hargrove laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "I think not, Owens. This land belongs to the Sonoran Mining Company, my company, and you're harboring a woman who is promised to me." "Julia isn't promised to anyone," Cole replied, his voice level despite the tension. "She's her own woman, making her own choices." Hargrove's smile faded. "Step aside, cowboy, this isn't your fight." "That's where you're wrong," Cole said. "When you threaten an innocent woman, force her into marriage to cover debts that you've deliberately engineered, it becomes my fight." Julia, unable to remain silent any longer, stood up from behind the cot. "It's my fight too, Mr. Hargrove, and I'm finished being a pawn in your game." Hargrove's eyes narrowed as they fixed on her. "Julia, my dear, this little adventure of yours has gone on quite long enough. Your father is beside himself with worry. Come back with me now, and I might be persuaded to forgive this indiscretion." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Julia said firmly. "And neither are your stolen cattle once the U.S. Marshal hears our testimony." A flash of something fear perhaps crossed Hargrove's face before his confident mask returned. "Testimony? About what?" "A business arrangement between myself and Harold Keller. There's nothing illegal about that." "Perhaps not," Cole agreed. "But cattle rustling, land fraud, extortion, those are hanging offenses in this territory, Hargrove." The two men behind Hargrove shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. Hargrove noticed and snapped, "Stand your ground, he's bluffing." "Am I?" Cole asked mildly. "The marshal will be in Tucson tomorrow. He already has statements from 3 ranchers whose cattle you've stolen. Add Julia's testimony about being forced into marriage to cover manufactured debts, and well, I don't fancy your chances with a territorial jury." For a long moment, the only sound in the shack was the crackling of the small fire. Then Hargrove drew his own pistol in a swift motion. "If that's the case," he said coldly, "I'll have to ensure you never reach Tucson." What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. One of Hargrove's men, apparently having second thoughts about murder, grabbed his employer's arm. "Mr. Hargrove, I didn't sign on for killing." In the ensuing struggle, Hargrove's gun discharged, the bullet splintering the wooden table. Cole took advantage of the confusion to shove Julia to the floor, shielding her with his body as he fired 2 quick shots. The first struck Hargrove in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second hit the doorframe as the other men ducked outside. "Stay down," Cole ordered Julia, moving quickly to the window to assess the situation. Outside, the 2 hired guns had taken cover behind rocks, while Hargrove, clutching his bleeding shoulder, stumbled toward his horse. "They're regrouping," Cole said grimly. "We need to move before they surround us." "Where?" Julia asked, her heart pounding. "You said the canyon narrows ahead." Cole thought quickly. "There's a side trail about 50 yards up, leads to higher ground. If we can reach it, we might be able to circle back to the horses." He glanced at her, his expression torn. "It's risky." "More risky than staying here," Julia countered, rising to her feet with determination. A smile flickered across Cole's face. "You really are something, Julia Keller." He checked his revolver, then the ammunition in his belt. "All right. When I give the word, we're going to run for that trail. Stay low, stay behind me, and don't stop for anything." "Understand," Julia nodded, gathering her skirts in one hand, the derringer still clutched in the other. Cole moved to the door, peering cautiously around the frame. "Now!" They burst from the shack, Cole firing twice to keep Hargrove's men pinned down as they sprinted for the side trail. Julia's lungs burned and her legs felt leaden, but fear and determination drove her forward. Behind them, shots rang out, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. The side trail was little more than a goat path winding up the steep canyon wall. But Julia scrambled up it without hesitation, Cole close behind her, turning occasionally to fire back at their pursuers. "Keep going," he urged as they climbed higher, the trail becoming steeper and more treacherous. Julia's boots slipped on loose gravel and she nearly fell, catching herself on a jutting rock. Her hands were scraped and bleeding, but she pushed on, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death or worse, a return to Hargrove's control. They reached a narrow ledge about 30 feet above the canyon floor and paused to catch their breath. Below, they could see Hargrove gesturing angrily with his good arm, directing his men to follow them up the trail. "They're coming," Julia gasped, her chest heaving. Cole nodded grimly, checking his ammunition. "I'm down to 3 bullets. Make your derringer count if you need to use it." Julia swallowed hard but nodded. "I will." They continued along the ledge, which gradually widened as it curved around the canyon wall. Below them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. "There," Cole said suddenly, pointing ahead to where the ledge descended toward the canyon floor again. "If we can reach that point, we can cut back to where the horses are hidden." They moved as quickly as they dared, the narrow path offering little room for error. One misstep would mean a fatal fall to the rocks below. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the canyon and making it harder to see the path clearly. A shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the rock wall near Julia's head. She ducked instinctively, nearly losing her balance. Cole's arm shot out, steadying her. "Careful," he warned, then turned to fire back, his shot rewarded with a cry of pain from below. "I hit one of them," he said. "But that leaves Hargrove and one more." They pressed on, the path now beginning its descent. Julia could see their horses in the distance, still tethered where Cole had left them, apparently undisturbed by the gunfire. "We're going to make it," she breathed, hope surging within her. But as they reached the bottom of the path, a figure stepped out from behind a boulder, gun raised. It was Hargrove, his face pale from pain and loss of blood, but his eyes blazing with hatred. "That's far enough," he said, his gun aimed at Cole's chest. Cole pushed Julia behind him, his own weapon raised. "It's over, Hargrove. Even if you kill us, the marshal has enough evidence to come after you." "Perhaps," Hargrove conceded, his voice strained, "but I'll have the satisfaction of ensuring you don't live to see it." His gaze shifted to Julia. "And as for you, my dear, it's a shame it's come to this. You could have had a comfortable life as my wife." "I'd rather die free than live as your possession," Julia replied, her voice steady despite her fear. A flicker of respect crossed Hargrove's face before his expression hardened again. "As you wish." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Hargrove's finger tightened on the trigger. Cole lunged forward, firing his own weapon. Julia, acting on instinct, raised the derringer and pulled the trigger. 3 shots rang out almost simultaneously, echoing off the canyon walls. Hargrove staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as 2 red stains blossomed on his chest, one from Cole's bullet, one from Julia's. He fell to his knees, then toppled sideways onto the dusty ground, his eyes staring sightlessly at the darkening sky. Julia stood frozen, the smoking derringer still extended before her. She had never killed before, had never imagined she could. A wave of shock washed over her and she swayed slightly. "Julia." Cole's voice seemed to come from far away. She turned to him and gasped. He was on one knee, clutching his side where a dark stain was spreading across his shirt. "Cole." She dropped the derringer and rushed to his side. "You're hit." "It's not bad," he grunted, though his face was drawn with pain. "Bullet grazed my side. Help me up." Julia supported him as he struggled to his feet, her mind racing. "We need to get you to a doctor." "Tucson," Cole said through gritted teeth. "We need to keep going. Hargrove's other man could still be out there." As if on cue, they heard the sound of a horse galloping away down the canyon, the last of their pursuers fleeing the scene. With Julia's help, Cole made it to the horses. She tore a strip from her petticoat to bind his wound, working quickly and efficiently despite her trembling hands. "You're good at that," Cole observed, watching her tie off the makeshift bandage. "I've had practice," Julia replied, trying to sound calm though her heart was still racing. Growing up on a ranch, someone's always getting hurt. Once his wound was bound, Cole insisted he could ride. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured her, though Julia wasn't convinced. Still, she helped him mount his stallion, then swung up onto her own horse. As they rode away from the canyon, leaving Hargrove's body behind, Julia felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that the immediate danger was past, guilt over taking a life, worry for Cole's injury, and uncertainty about what the future held. "Are you all right?" Cole asked softly, drawing his horse alongside hers. Julia considered the question. "I don't know," she answered honestly. I didn't think I could." "You did what you had to do," Cole said gently. "He would have killed us both." "I know," Julia whispered. "But still." Cole reached across the space between them to touch her arm. "It's all right to feel what you're feeling, Julia. Taking a life, even in self-defense, isn't something to be taken lightly. But remember, you're alive. I'm alive. And Hargrove can't hurt anyone else now." Julia nodded, taking comfort in his words and the warm pressure of his hand on her arm. As they rode toward Tucson and whatever awaited them there, she found herself drawing strength from the man beside her, a man who, just days ago, had been a stranger, but who now seemed as essential to her as breathing. The journey to Tucson was arduous. Cole's wound, though not life-threatening, caused him considerable pain, and Julia worried about infection setting in. They rode through the night, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the horses and check Cole's bandage. By dawn, they were both exhausted, but the distant outlines of Tucson's buildings provided a welcome sight. The town was larger than Gila Bend, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and signs of prosperity everywhere. "The Grand Hotel," Cole directed, his voice strained with pain. "On Congress Street." They rode directly to the hotel, attracting curious stares from early morning pedestrians. A disheveled woman in a torn and dusty riding habit, supporting a man who was clearly injured, blood seeping through his makeshift bandage. At the hotel, Julia helped Cole dismount, alarmed at how heavily he leaned on her. "We need to find the marshal," she said, her arm around Cole's waist as they entered the lobby. The desk clerk looked up in alarm at their appearance. "Sir, madam, are you in need of assistance?" U.S. Marshal James Parker, Cole managed, gripping the desk for support. "Is he here?" The clerk hesitated, clearly unsure whether to help these rough-looking strangers or call for the local law. "Please," Julia implored. "It's a matter of life and death." Something in her voice must have convinced him, for he nodded. "Room 203. Shall I send for a doctor as well?" Yes, thank you, Julia said gratefully, already helping Cole toward the stairs. By the time they reached room 203, Cole was leaning heavily against her, his face alarmingly pale. Julia knocked urgently on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man with a graying mustache and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in the sun. His keen eyes took in their appearance at a glance. "Marshall Parker?" Julia asked. The man nodded, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Who's asking? I'm Julia Keller, and this is Cole Owens. He's been working with you on the Hargrove case. He's been shot, please, he needs help." Recognition flashed in the marshal's eyes. "Owens. Damn, boy, what happened to you?" He stepped aside, ushering them into the room. "Lay him on the bed there." Julia helped Cole to the bed, her heart racing with fear at how weak he seemed. The marshal examined the wound with practiced hands, his expression grim but not alarmed. "Bullet grazed him good, but it's not too deep. Clean shot, at least." He looked up at Julia. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday evening," Julia replied, hovering anxiously. "We've been riding all night to reach you." The marshal raised an eyebrow. "And Hargrove?" "I assume he's involved in this somehow." Julia swallowed hard. "He's dead. He tried to kill us and we shot him. It was self-defense." Marshal Parker studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, Miss Keller, and knowing Hargrove, I'm not surprised it came to this." He turned back to Cole. "Hang in there, Owens. Doctor's on his way." The doctor arrived shortly thereafter, a competent, no-nonsense man who cleaned and stitched Cole's wound with minimal fuss. "Keep it clean. No riding for at least 3 days and he'll be fine," he pronounced, packing up his instruments. "He's lost blood, but he's strong. Rest and good food will set him right." While the doctor worked, Julia had given Marshal Parker a full account of everything that had happened: Hargrove's attempt to force her into marriage, his threats against her family, their escape, and the final confrontation in the canyon. The marshal listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "That matches what we've heard from other victims of Hargrove's schemes," he said when she finished. "He's been buying up land all along the proposed railroad route through fraudulent means. Your family's ranch was one of the key properties he needed." "Will there be trouble about his death?" Julia asked hesitantly. The marshal shook his head. "Clear case of self-defense from what you've told me. I'll ride out to the canyon with a posse to retrieve the body and confirm your story, but I don't anticipate any charges being filed against you or Owens." Relief washed over Julia. "And my family, will they be safe?" "I'll send a deputy to Gila Bend today to explain the situation and ensure their protection," Marshal Parker promised. "As for Hargrove's debts against your father's ranch, well, with Hargrove dead and evidence of his fraudulent practices, I believe the courts will look favorably on having those debts significantly reduced or even forgiven entirely." Julia sagged with relief, tears filling her eyes. It was over. They were safe. The marshal stood, donning his hat. "You both should rest. I've paid for this room for the next 3 days. By then, Owens should be fit to travel and we'll have sorted out the legal matters." After he left, Julia sat beside Cole, who had drifted into an exhausted sleep following the doctor's ministrations. Gently, she brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, allowing herself to truly look at him now that they were safe. Even in sleep, there was a strength to his features that reassured her. His face had relaxed, the lines of pain easing, and he looked younger, more vulnerable. Julia's heart swelled with feelings she was only beginning to understand but which felt as natural as breathing. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead before settling into a chair beside the bed to keep watch over him. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Marshal Parker returned from the canyon, confirming their account of Hargrove's death and bringing news that the remaining gunman had been apprehended trying to flee the territory. A deputy returned from Gila Bend with a letter from Julia's family they were safe, relieved to hear she was unharmed, and eager for her return. The deputy also brought surprising news. With Hargrove's death and the exposure of his criminal activities, the bank had agreed to restructure the Keller's debt, allowing them to keep their ranch under more manageable terms. Cole recovered quickly, his strong constitution and Julia's careful nursing speeding his healing. By the third day, he was able to sit up and even walk short distances, though he tired easily. On the evening of that third day, they sat together on the small balcony of the hotel room, watching the sunset paint the Tucson skyline in shades of gold and crimson. A comfortable silence had settled between them, born of shared danger and growing affection. "I've been thinking," Cole said finally, his voice steady though his eyes revealed his nervousness, "about what happens next." Julia turned to him, her heart quickening. "And what have you decided?" Cole took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I meant what I said back in the line shack, Julia. I want to court you properly. But I understand if you need to return to your family first, or if you've had second thoughts given everything that's happened." Julia studied their intertwined hands, marveling at how right it felt to have her fingers laced with his. "I haven't had second thoughts," she said softly. "If anything, these past days have only confirmed what I was beginning to feel when we first met." Hope blazed in Cole's eyes. "And what is that?" Julia smiled, her heart full. "That sometimes, when you least expect it, life brings you exactly what you need. Someone who sees you for who you truly are, who respects your choices, who says that's not your burden to bear when everyone else is telling you it is." Cole raised her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her palm. "Julia Keller, I believe I'm falling in love with you." "Good," Julia replied, her smile widening, "because I believe I'm falling in love with you too, Cole Owens." This time there was no interruption, no danger to stop what both their hearts desired. Cole leaned forward, his free hand gently cupping her cheek, and Julia met him halfway. Their first kiss was sweet and tender, a promise of all that might come. When they parted, both were smiling, their futures suddenly bright with possibilities neither had imagined just days before. 3 days later, with Cole sufficiently recovered for travel, they rode back to Gila Bend together. Marshal Parker accompanied them, along with 2 deputies, to ensure their safety and to officially inform the town of Theodore Hargrove's death and criminal activities. The reunion with Julia's family was tearful and joyous. Harold Keller embraced his daughter with a fervor that spoke of his fear and relief, while Mary Keller fussed over both Julia and Cole, insisting they needed feeding up after their ordeal. Emma and Sarah peppered them with questions about their adventure, their young faces alight with excitement at having a real-life hero and heroine in their family. That evening, after dinner, Cole asked to speak privately with Harold Keller. The 2 men walked out to the porch, their conversation low and serious. Julia watched them from the window, her heart in her throat, until she saw her father clap Cole on the shoulder with a broad smile. When they returned, Harold announced to the family, "Mr. Owens has asked my permission to court Julia properly, and I've given it gladly." Mary Keller dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, while Emma and Sarah exchanged delighted glances. "Furthermore," Harold continued, "he's offered me a position managing his ranch near Tucson, with the opportunity to buy in as a partner once we're back on our feet. We'll be able to keep this land as well, thanks to the marshal's intervention with the bank." Julia looked at Cole in surprise. "You didn't tell me about the job offer." Cole smiled sheepishly. "I wanted to speak to your father first. I didn't want to presume." Julia's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness and integrity. Over the next 6 months, Cole courted Julia with a thoroughness that became the talk of both Gila Bend and Tucson. He visited regularly, bringing gifts not just for Julia but for her entire family. He helped Harold repair the ranch buildings and fences. He taught Emma and Sarah to play chess and listened patiently to Mary's stories of her own courtship years ago. And with Julia, he was unfailingly respectful yet ardently attentive. Their rides across the open country, always properly chaperoned by Emma or Sarah, became the highlights of Julia's weeks. During these times, they shared their hopes and dreams, their fears and doubts, building a foundation of friendship and trust that deepened their growing love. In the fall of 1886, exactly 1 year after they first met, Cole proposed properly, with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "It's not as fancy as diamonds," he said apologetically, as he knelt before her under the willow tree where they had planned their escape so many months ago. "But it comes with a promise that you'll never have to bear a burden alone again, as long as I live." Julia's eyes filled with happy tears as she extended her hand. "It's perfect. And yes, Cole Owens, I will marry you." Their wedding, held the following spring, was everything Hargrove's forced arrangement would not have been: joyful, sincere, and surrounded by people who truly cared for them. Julia wore a gown of ivory satin that Mary and her sisters had worked on for months. Cole, handsome in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such undisguised love that several of the guests were moved to tears. After the ceremony, they moved to Cole's ranch outside Tucson, where the 4-room house had been expanded to include a spacious kitchen, a proper parlor, and an extra bedroom for the future, as Cole said with a meaningful smile. The Keller family followed a month later, Harold taking up his position as ranch manager with enthusiasm. The two families blended seamlessly, united by shared experiences and genuine affection. In the years that followed, Cole and Julia built a life together that exceeded all their dreams. Their ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. They had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter who grew up strong and confident under the loving guidance of parents who had fought for their right to choose their own path. Sometimes on clear nights, Cole and Julia would sit on the porch of their home, watching the stars spread across the desert sky, their hands intertwined as they had been since that first ride to freedom. "You ever think about him?" Cole asked once, referring to Hargrove. "About what happened?" Julia considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with regret exactly, but with a kind of sadness that his greed led him to such an end." Cole nodded, understanding as always. He never understood what real wealth is. "And what's that?" Julia asked, though she knew the answer. Cole smiled, pulling her close. "This, family, love, the freedom to build a life with the person you choose." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'd take this over all the land and money in the Arizona territory." Julia leaned into his embrace, thinking how far they'd come from that desperate night when she'd fled her family's ranch with a man she barely knew but somehow trusted completely. "That day in town," she said, "when you told me my family's debts weren't my burden to bear. Did you know then that this is where we'd end up?" Cole chuckled. "No, I just knew I couldn't stand by and watch you sacrifice yourself. But I hoped, Julia. From that first moment I hoped." As the stars continued their eternal dance above them, Julia Keller Owens gave thanks for that hope, and for the courage they'd both found to fight for a future. Neither had dared imagine a future built on love freely given, not on obligation or sacrifice. but on the simple, profound truth that some burdens were never meant to be carried alone.